What was it, 4 years ago? Yeah, it was 4 years ago, I can't believe it, that I stood in this very spot with the first ever Volvo here on the old show. And it wasn't really a first. I would argue it was a milestone for Volvo because it was like this whiz-bang baby buggy that was a complete departure in every area for a car company that hadn't introduced a car, a new one at least, in like 8 or 9 years at that point. But they didn't just say, hey, here's a new car, go drive it. They said, we're going to come out with like 20 cars after that. So you can imagine I was scratching my head like, I'll believe it when I see it, buddy. Well, here we are 4 years later, and this is car like 19. I think it is. Kind of lost count. So it's time for you and I to drive another new Volvo, but thankfully it's not a baby buggy, and this one does have the turbocharged, supercharged engine. So let's go out and have some fun in a really cool color Volvo Sedan. Top of the morning on this fine October day here in the California Republic. First crisp one we've had, which is a great excuse to go out in a forced induction square car, turbocharged and supercharged. However, we need to kick off this day with weights and measures. Do you remember all those S90s we've driven? Well, the lightest derivation is 4,135 pounds. Now, I bring this up because those cars, at least the middle model, has the engine like this. So that means 500 less pounds or thereabout with exactly the same horsepower. So, now that we understand that together, let's put our foot into this thing and see how it delivers power. Now, the first thing you notice is, yes, it delivers power like a Volvo. The engine has to work a little bit harder because it's a four-cylinder that's got a lot of power coming out of it. But it's almost as if it's a different engine because, yes, the lower weight does kind of help with that, but it's the lower weight combined. Oh, hey now! And you get a little air on top of that. The lower weight combined with the fact that it delivers torque so low, 2,200 pounds, that helped in the S90, but really it's as if you're getting some mechanical advantage by doing this in a lighter car. Now, if you're a Volvo fanboy, or fangirl for that matter, and or you have seen any of my other Volvo episodes, you know I've kind of sandbagged here because we've done all of this in comfort mode. So let's go ahead and switch this to dynamic mode. We have a nice incline here, put our foot into it. And here, yeah, the throttle mapping changes, but what happens, really the biggest difference is the transmission doesn't have to work as hard. It's not hunting as much for gears because obviously the throttle mapping is working in conjunction with the transmission mapping to keep it in a lower gear. Thus, it's more usable power from pretty much any point in the power band. Before you and I get too far down the road of this episode, there is one major technical asterisk we need to cover, and that is the fact that the car we're driving is a European spec car, even though we're driving it on US roads, and it's fitted with a South Carolina manufactured number plate. And that presents the following difference: the setup of the suspension. See, we covered in the tech review that there's a steel spring setup and then there's an air ride setup that's on offer for extra money. However, in Europe, or really the rest of the world, in an R design at least, there is one steel spring setup, and that is what's called a dynamic setup. It's stiffer, which is what an R design should be. Well, in the US, apparently there's two steel spring setups. There is the one that comes fitted as standard, and that's a more compliant setup. I don't know why they offer this. And then number two, there's this dynamic setup, which is standard everywhere else, you pay extra for in the US. I'm guessing it's because they think Americans like softer cars. I don't know. I don't, but I feel I needed some full disclosure here. Got it? You probably weren't aware, but this thing has a hell of a name. 2019 Volvo S60 T6 R Design all-wheel drive sedan. Whew, that's a hell of a lot of words. I need a break after saying that. But the operative term we need to focus on there is this is a sedan, which means it's supposed to be practical. So I am going to attempt to be practical, and thankfully it's not a baby buggy, so I'm not going to do it from the back seat. Hence, traffic. And this is about as good as it gets in Los Angeles. Middle of the day, 405 South. Anyway, let's handicap this thing. I sandbagged you now a second time because I've only shown you two modes. Let's go to the eco mode, which is the efficient drive mode. So we're going to get better fuel economy. Let's put our foot into it a bit more. there's more of a delay in acceleration, there's no doubt about it. You'd expect it. What you heard there was it had to downshift, so it needs to hunt, and that was 2 gears that had to downshift, which it's doing what your, I don't know how to nicely say this, one of the people that was a big impact on my life was my ex-girlfriend, first girlfriend, her father, great guy, Wally. I mean, this guy taught me really how to manage money, but one of the lessons he gave me was you want to get a manual transmission car to the highest gear as fast as possible to get the most efficiency. And obviously, whoever programmed this transmission has been sitting with Wally and taking lessons from Wally. Now, as we pass the spot where Sandra Bullock once jumped a bus, let's understand the suspension by changing some lanes here. And the thing you're reminded of is this is an R design. Now, it doesn't really sound logical because really the stiffer suspension has more to do with driving dynamics than some of the canyon roads we were on. But here, let's just say it doesn't let you forget, because like you go over some of the expansion joints where the road isn't as perfect, and you feel the impact of the stiffer suspension is something that is noticeable driving it around town. Does it bother me? No, this is something I would seek out, but that is one of the biggest differences between this and say if it was the fancy Inscription or the basic Momentum model. Now, I promise I didn't set this up, but there's another S60 in front of us here, and it kind of reminds me about the reason for being of the difference between that and this, the all 4-cylinder strategy, which started back in the XT90, and that's fuel economy. And this is where I kind of laugh at like the all EcoBoost thing that Ford does. They came out and said, oh my God, great fuel economy, and they show these amazing numbers on the window sticker. But here's the problem. If I do this, in any one of these turbocharged 4 cylinders, the fuel economy is going to be like the 5 that was in that one, or the 6, or even an 8-cylinder. Now, back in the canyons, I was doing somewhere in the teens in this specific one with 316 horsepower. Now, let's driving in and out of traffic, like not exactly driving like your grandmother or a nun, and I'm still doing 20.2 mpg, which is respectable for this size car. And then while we're doing this in and out of traffic thing, again, I hate to be a broken record, but the 500 pounds difference and the shorter wheelbase, this is where you notice a huge difference between the S90 and the S60. This is the car that one would want to be driving around town of the entire Volvo lineup. The fact that it's got the lower center of gravity, the shorter wheelbase, it's relatively light in the grand scheme of the Volvo world, but that translates to me wanting to be able to get past this pickup quickly and not working very hard. Overall, a great tool for driving around town. The last time you and I drove a Volvo sedan was about a year ago. It was that stunning S90 T8, the one with the long wheelbase and the fancy back seats. Great experience except for one thing. And that one thing, full disclosure, that wasn't the first time I noticed it. It's pretty much consistent on all Volvos that I've driven since the XC90. Infotainment system, and not the design. Like, I love the paradigm shift away from like 16:9s to this like tablet idea of the 9-inch diagonal screen and the way they do the tiles. It's, oh, and by the way, I didn't know there was a name for the infotainment system. They call it the Sensus system, where I thought it was just the Volvo infotainment system. Anyway, that system was just unbearably slow on startup. Like you saw in that episode, I timed it, and it was like 2 minutes for the system to be usable, any function, after you started the car. And that just didn't work for me. And apparently someone from Volvo watched that episode, because now the S60s, starting with the S60s, they all have a 50% faster processor. So I say we test that, don't you? With that, I have brought my fancy-dancy stopwatch. So let's go ahead and hit start on the stopwatch, start the car. Okay, so it's going into the 4 tiles with an animation, and just as a recap, the bottom tile is the last application used. Let's see if we can get some HVAC going, because think, if you're in like Arizona in the summer or Minnesota in the winter, you want this going. Still nothing at 17 seconds. Give me a rotary knob here, man. Just move it off of the infotainment system. Let's do some rotary knobs. Okay, so connect compatible device. Oh, wait a minute, radio came on. Oh, we actually have a channel list. So let's stop. 33 seconds. Now we have the radio. Let's see if we can go still nothing with the HVAC system. So yes, there is an improvement. Some of the applications actually work within 30 seconds of startup. I still think there's some room for improvement, but overall, nice change. There's something I haven't shared with you very often. The folks who design, engineer, and build Volvos, very cool people. There are two guys in particular with this car, Stefan and Anders. One, Stefan, he's on the Sweden side of the Atlantic, and Anders, he's on this side, the US side of the Atlantic, but he is Swedish. Both of them are very excited about this car, and they're like kind of pushing me to drive aggressively, so I had to find a proper road. So with that, let's go straight into dynamic mode, put our foot into it, and follow directions. So this is my private little moto canyon here. You remember it from when we raced the skateboarder and the Cadillac. Very aggressive road, and here we are in a Volvo that is mainly front-wheel drive. This one's all-wheel drive. Remember, we can send a good amount of the power, maybe 50% of the power, to the rear wheels. Coming around a beautiful, sharp, declining radius, hairpin turn here. A little bit of plow over to that side. But I will say, Anders has shared with me that this is a stiffer setup. Remember, Stefan was on the show last year, and he shared with us that the XC60 R design on the steel suspension, which this one is about 40% stiffer. Didn't get an exact number here, but you can tell someone has spent a lot of time in composure. If we go around some of these turns here, there's no float. Now, I would like to point out the stunning view of Los Angeles as we are driving like maniacs. Please do not tell anybody. We're getting to a much more technical part of my little secret test track here. And notice there is a significant amount of stability here. Like you would expect a good amount of body lean in a front-wheel drive, at least a front-wheel drive biased vehicle. And here we're going to come around a really sharp turn in just a second. And it's an elevation change, sharp hairpin turn, all at the same time. Just in case you need a bathroom, you got one right there. It's cut it tight. The steering is beautiful on this as well. I have to say, remember we talked about the 500-pound weight reduction, how it helped on acceleration. Here, it also helps significantly on driving dynamics. And now we're getting to the point where it's the most challenging. The road gets tighter and the pavement is terrible. So there's a lot of dips and bobs, broken pavement. And let's push it a little bit harder around here. And it's amazing, again, stiffer suspension. You don't feel like your guts are coming out. This is in dynamic mode. This is the worst part of the track here, and it does not fly as a front-wheel drive car should. I gotta say, I can see why Anders and Stefan are very excited about this vehicle. If you have watched the entirety of this episode thus far, you will not at all be surprised to learn that this is now officially my favorite new generation Volvo to drive, and really the reasons are incredibly simple. When you make something shorter, lighter, and keep the power the same, that will invariably have a positive impact on the driving dynamics. However, what I didn't expect is it's an exponential improvement over the S90. The other thing about it is going into this, I thought for sure I still would say C-Class all the way, especially like the V6 twin turbo models that they do. But here's the thing. In terms of driving dynamics, that car still edges out the S60. But when you consider, forget about money and value, because this one is definitely cheaper. When you consider design, especially the interior, I would have to edge out the Volvo in this case. I wouldn't even consider the Audi, and I'm having a really hard time warming up to the design of the new 3 Series, especially now that there's no manual on offer in the higher end of the inline 6. That leaves us with one really important piece of information or business to take care of, and that is some suggestions for improvement. And here is where I want to harken back to 2 cars you're going to laugh at me about, the E63S wagon and the M5. Can we do something like that where we cut off the power to the front wheels and send the power to the rear wheels? I know that's a lot to ask considering the direction of the engine or the placement of the engine in this one, but maybe 80% of the power to the rear wheels. That can be done because the current setup, it's only about 50%. I think that would take an already good package and just completely transform it. Maybe even beyond that twin turbo V6 C-Class. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word. With that, I do have to say, Anders, Stefan, and all the other Folks at Volvo have really knocked it out of the park with this one. And I would also say that this is probably my favorite Volvo current generation to look at, but something tells me that prize is going to go away at the end of November when you and I drive the V60 wagon. But you can come back to find out if it changes. Until then, going to get on a plane here in about 5 days and go drive a 500 horsepower car in, or really I should say on, a track that I've always wanted to drive on. So look forward to those episodes probably early to mid-November. And see you next time. Bis später.